inviting you to look at the process of our engagement with others in a different way, inviting you to think about leaving an antiquated model behind. We'll call it the harvesting model. And you know that I want harvesting, right? The goal is always to have a harvest here in this enterprise. But I'm thinking of a different way that we can help have a better harvest. And part of it is to get more people off of the bench by giving them the tools to do gardening. And so we are going to be thinking about putting a stone in people's shoe. That's going to be our goal if we're able. But we're going to need to get some information from in the context of an individual conversation in order to accomplish that. And this is where the game plan is going to come in, how we maneuver. Now, before we get in the game plan, I want to do a little exercise with you, okay? So what we're going to need to do is to break up kind of into 4 groups. Now, you don't need to go anywhere, really, but in your individual groups, you can kind of huddle a bit together. And so each group might have about 2 or 3 little huddles because of the way the chairs are. Just do your best. And I am going to give you a scenario. I'll read it to you, and then I'm going to ask you to, as a group, think of responses, okay? Now, I call this the 10-second window. And the reason I call it the 10-second window is there are going to be occasions in your life where you're involved with people who don't know the Lord, and something is going to happen. Something's going to be said. A person's going to make a comment or raise an issue or ask a question in the particular environment that you're in. And it's going to give you a brief opportunity to act. That's why I call it the 10-second window. And the key here is to think, what is it when the person makes the comment in the circumstance? What is it that you say next? Now, this is a really important part of it because this is your launch into an engagement. And this arguably is the hardest part for particularly of people who are a little retiring and shy and maybe timid. It's the hardest part because you're stepping into the fray. And you're going to see with the illustration that the fray is already, that looks like trouble ahead. And so what's going to be really key is how you get into the conversation. What do you say? All right? And so this is going to be a little exercise in that. Now, qualification here. If you have read the tactics book, you cannot participate. I'm sorry, because you're going to ruin the exercise. And if you have already taken a course in tactics, same deal, and some of you might have had Bible study, and so you've gone through the material. Okay, what I'm trying to get is kind of like an undisciplined, uneducated, in a certain sense, unsophisticated, standard kind of reaction that Christians might have when they get into these kinds of conversations. So just do the best you can in this. And, it's kind of contrived, this little exercise. And usually I get a lot better answers to the challenge in this exercise than probably would have been the case if it was a real thing, Everybody's kind of on their best behavior, and they're thinking, what's he at? Here's the thing I think he wants me to say, But that's okay. It's still just an exercise that will help you out, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. So I'm going to break this up into, let's just say, let me just say right here is the dividing line. So you guys forward are going to be group 1, all right? And again, some of you are going to be out of play. I just know that. Here, this is going to be group 2, all right? Back to here. From the camera, back will be group 3, and from the camera forward will be group 4, okay? So I'm going to read your scenarios, and you might jot down a couple of notes here for your individual group so that when we break up after I've read for each group, and we'll take maybe 5 minutes or so for you to talk and do the exercise. After we after I do this, then we'll break up and do it, and then we'll come back together. I need to get my glasses. You know, I used to be nearsighted, and that means I had to wear glasses for far vision. But you know what happens when you get older? It goes the other way. So now I can see fine at a distance. I just can't read. All right. So here's scene one. You're at a dinner party with some of your close friends from church. The conversation ranges. Now, you don't have to write all this down. We'll get to the core of it in a second. Here's the setting, though. The conversation ranges naturally over a number of interesting spiritual topics. And suddenly, to your surprise and embarrassment, the host's 15-year-old son announces with some belligerence that he doesn't believe in God anymore. It's simply not rational, he says. There is no proof. No one had any idea he'd been moving in this direction. There's a stunned silence. What will you say? That's your assignment. So the deal is, person announces there is no God. He's an atheist. The reason is it's not rational. There's no proof. What will you say? Okay, this is your assignment. Second group here. It's the night of your weekly Bible study group. During the discussion of the Sunday sermon on the Great Commission, a newcomer remarks, well, who are we to say Christianity is better than any other religion? I think the essence of Jesus' teaching is love, just like every other religion. It's not up to us to tell other people how to think or believe, okay? So you're in a Bible study of Christians, but here's a newcomer. Oh, wait a minute, what are we doing? We're supposed to love each other, not tell people what to do, what to believe. Okay, that's the way our religion is anyway, okay? So the rest of the group fidgets awkwardly, but says nothing. What do you say? How do you respond? So there's your assignment, okay? Third group, back here. You're riding the university shuttle with a friend who notices a Bible in your backpack. He said, oh, yeah, I've read the Bible before. It's got some interesting stories, but people take it too seriously. It's only written by men after all, and men make mistakes. You try to recall the points your pastor made a few weeks ago about the Bible's inspiration, but you come up empty-handed. What do you say? Right? So here's the challenge. Bible's only written by men. Nice stuff, but don't take it too seriously. Okay, the final situation here. You're sitting in a car dealer watching TV, waiting with other customers for your car to be serviced. The television news program highlights religious groups trying to influence important moral legislation. The person sitting next to you, he doesn't know who you are really, of course, but he says, haven't these people, these Christians, ever heard of separation of church and state? Those Christians are always trying to force their views on everyone else. You can't legislate morality. Why don't they just leave the rest of us alone? Other people are listening. You don't want to create a scene, but you feel you have to say something. What's your next move? Okay? So this is an issue. You can't force your morality on other people. You can't legislate morality, separation of church and state. Okay, you have 4 scenarios, and you have about 5 or 6 minutes to go ahead and bunch up in little groups and discuss what your next move is. Remember, your assignment is, given the circumstance, what do you say? How do you get into the fray? Okay, go. You quiet down faster than my kids. That's great. All right, I'm interested in what you came up with. And I'm well aware that, like I said earlier, most of you are tipped off a little bit to the direction that I'm going to be taking you, and it's going to influence your responses, but that's okay. I'm interested in what you came up with. So let's talk about the first scenario that I described. You're at this dinner party, and there's a young man there who then declares to the group who have religious convictions that he is no longer a religious person. He is an atheist, and that's because being an atheist is irrational. Being a Christian, believing in God is irrational, and there is no proof. And he was pretty belligerent about it. And when I say he was, I was actually at the dinner when this happened, and he was sitting right across from me, and his dad, who was the host, was sitting right to my right. Okay, so what do you say? What'd you come up with? Anybody want to volunteer something here? Yes, sir.
Start out with something to disarm him a little bit, calm him down because he's being aggressive. So you say, well, that's interesting, or something like that. And then I said, well, what would you consider good proof?
Okay, what would you consider good proof? Yeah. Anybody else? Yes.
I would probably ask him, when you say there's no proof of what exactly? Because that's a really broad statement to be talking about
Excuse me, I'm having a hard time hearing you. I don't have my hearing aids on.
I was just saying, when he's saying that there's no proof, that's a really broad statement. So is he proof of what exactly? Is he referring to? Is he talking about the resurrection, incarnation? I would probably just offer that and then wait and see what he says before I offer.
Okay, when he says there's no proof, that's very broad. There seems to be a lot of reasons that could be given to believe in God. Has he thought about some of these other things or something to that effect? Is that?
What is he referring to?
What is he referring to when you say no proof? Okay. I'm not going to weigh in on the things so much right now in specific. I just want to see what you have to say. Anybody else?
What changed in your rationale? How did you view it as rational before, and why do you now view it as
Okay, good. What happened? What changed? Why is it that before you did believe in God and now you don't? What rationale has changed? Good. Because he did say it's irrational, so he must have a reason for that. Okay, great. Any others for the first group? All righty, let's try the second group, okay? This is the Bible study. Apparently there was some confusion about this at first. Were you able to cover this adequately when you got cleared up on it? Yeah, okay. This is the Bible study where somebody who's a visitor says, who are we to say Christianity is better than any other religion? Religion is just really about loving one another, not telling people how to live or what to believe. So what did you guys come up with? If anything. Well, there's a lot of work going. Who's in support? Yes, ma'am.
Like what led you to believe that?
Pardon me?
Like,
No, go ahead. You said it.
like what led you to believe that?
What led you to believe what you just said? Like all religions are basically the same about love. Okay, what are your reasons for that? Good.
what criteria did you base that on?
What criteria flesh it out a little bit for me. If I was the guy who said it, you would say to me,
What did you base that on? Like, what criteria did you use to come to that conclusion?
that base on the idea that all religions are about love or basically, okay, good. I made a statement, I made a claim, so what's my rationale for concluding that, ma'am?
What's your understanding of Christianity?
What is your understanding of Christianity, okay? Yeah, I'll just repeat it. It might be easier that way. Anybody else? Okay, good. That's a good shot. Good start. Scene 3. There's writing in the university shuttle. The person sees your Bible. Says, well, the Bible's a nice book, but it's only written by men and make mistakes. Don't take it too seriously. What did you guys come up with? Or gals, or people came up with. See, you gotta be so careful nowadays. What did the living sentient beings, however you construe yourself?
I think we took a little bit more off more of what you had read in there where they said, oh, I've read that. There's a lot of good stories. And I mean, just from my experience, it takes me long enough to read through something. What would have caused you even to read the Bible?
Okay, well, apparently you've read some of the Bible. Why did you read some of the Bible? Okay, there you go. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
What do you mean by too seriously?
What do you mean by?
Too seriously.
Oh, don't take it too seriously. What do you mean by that? Okay, there you go.
What are some examples of taking it too seriously?
What are some examples of taking it too seriously, where people kind of gone off on the deep end, got fanatical or whatever, or something like that? Okay. Anybody else?
I'll do it. Richard had a good point.
You had a good point?
Yeah,
He did?
I'll articulate it.
He had a good point.
That's crazy. It's crazy.
He said, pointing at the other person's textbook, do you know any books that a man didn't write? Is that your biology textbook?
Right.
Do you believe what's in there? It's you're basing your whole career on it, so.
Right. Okay. There's a point there. So the counter would be, well, in light of the dismissal of the Bible, because it's written by men, what about that book? Did human beings write that? But you're reading it and taking it seriously. What's the difference? Okay, there you go. All right. Finally, here you're in the dealership, you're getting your car repaired, you're watching TV, there's a political scene, and Christians are campaigning on a moral issue, and the person watching gets bugged. why don't these people just leave us alone? Don't they know about the separation of church and state? You can't legislate morality. So what'd you come up with?
The first thing we decided is you needed to figure out, does he have a problem with somebody protesting or the religious part?
Okay.
So different, because that's going to take two different.
Okay, you're explaining this to me. I want you to tell me, what do you say to the other person?
Well, that's a good question. What did I say? I'm learning a lot from you.
Okay, I'm learning a lot from you. Is that what you say to the other guy? Oh. I'm trying to stay in character here.
So is it the protesting that you have a problem with, or is it the religious focus of the protest?
Okay, there you go. See the difference what he did? Now he's in character doing what I told you to do in the first place. Okay, there we go. All right, that's so good. So the idea is, okay, you got 10 seconds. What do you say? Okay, nicely done.
What is morality to you?
What is morality to you? Okay.
What do you
Yes.
legislate? What do you?
I'm sorry, where are you? Wave your hand. Oh. Oh, yes, sir. Wait, you're not in this group. You lost your chance. Okay. Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. So, anything else from this group, sir?
What in life is important enough to you to stand up and protest?
What
is there something in your life that you feel compelled?
What would be something important enough to protest about in a situation like that? Okay?
You're right, we can't legislate morality.
You're right, we can't legislate morality. Is that what you believe? Well, I have a few questions for you. But just as an aside, morality turns out to be the only thing you can legislate. In other words, if your use of power doesn't have a moral justification, then it's not a legitimate use of public power. If the force of government is just used for your own benefit and not for the common good, okay? So anyway, this actually point came up when I was having a small conversation here. If somebody presses that, I would ask, is our laws against homicide appropriate? Yeah, okay, so that's forcing somebody to do something. Is that right? Is homicide immoral? So that would be a legislation on morality. Turns out all laws are like that, but it is a common thing to say, like you can't legislate this. People say this all the time because other people say it. And I want them to get thinking more about the nature of it, because it turns out the point of law is to force people to do the good thing that they wouldn't do if it was just left up to themselves. Anyway, so this has been fabulous as an exercise. And all of your responses were really, really great. So let's just close in prayer and go home. And like I said earlier, my suspicion is that if you're actually in those circumstances and you are aggressive enough to get into that, I think the impulse for most people is to make statements. It's to show what's wrong with the other person's point of view. No, you're wrong because of this. And so then now there's a confrontation of a contrary points of view. You guys had some time to relax as a group, work it out, which shows, by the way, and I'll get to this a little bit after lunch, the value of thinking of particular challenges that you might face in advance and how you would begin to address those things. All right? It really gives you a leg up. I'll get in more detail to that later. But in every single case, virtually every case, I don't think about it. I know of an exception of what I heard here in these scenarios. Your instincts was to throw the ball into the other court of the other person. And that's exactly what we're going to teach you to do in a more sophisticated way, and how to go from there. This is the power of the tactical approach, that illustration of the witch in Wisconsin, and even the conversations that you contrived here with the people who are rather, in some cases, somewhat belligerent. A question to Alex, right?
Max.
What happened to Alex? Keep going. Max, all right, okay, Max. We'll take Max. That's all right. What was I going to say about it? Oh, Max and I were talking here during the break because he's already been trained, and he said, "What about if a person is already belligerent? You said if anybody gets mad, I lose. What if they're already mad?" And this is the case where certainly people that we're talking about, an opponent, so to speak, in these scenarios is already kind of frustrated or bugged or maybe a little angry. What then? And I think in those cases, by maneuvering tactically, you can take some of the intensity out of the circumstances if you're careful, and then end up having a more genial discussion that has a better possibility of putting a stone in their shoe. Now, at Stand to Reason, we have lots of tactics that we use, and they have names like suicide and taking the roof off and just the facts, ma'am, and Rhodes Scholar and steamroller, and these are all maneuvers that you can do in conversations to help you to expose flaws in other people's thinking and also to put you in the driver's seat, because this is the goal of the tactical approach. It's to keep you in the driver's seat of the conversation. You're not being dragged all over by somebody else. You are the one who's directing the conversation, but it doesn't mean that you're the one who's doing all of the talking. In fact, in this approach, you're doing much less of the talking than you might have been doing, at least at first, than maybe you had done before. And this is actually a virtue, because a lot of you are thinking, if I'm supposed to get into the fray, that sounds a little scary, especially when I don't know what to say. So I'm going to give you, as we move through this, some of the tools so you'll know what to say to get you into the discussion in a way that you toss the ball into the other court, and now you're the listener, not the speaker. And so when you're listening and not talking, the pressure is not on you. I've been doing radio for a long time, and I do radio interviews. I do author interviews. I interviewed Craig Hazen last week, and we were talking off the air, about, just the whole process of doing interviews. And I said I'd rather be interviewed than interview, personally, because on the one hand, because people ask you questions, you talk, then you stop. And when you stop, there's dead air, and it's their job to fill it. Not mine if I'm being interviewed. But if I'm the interviewer, I got to fill the dead air, So I got to be right there, ready to go, keep going. But notice in these interviews, what my goal is not to do most of the talking. My goal is to help the other guy tell his story the best he can on the air. And how am I going to get him to do that? How am I going to direct that conversation in a very precise way that showcases that author's material the best? Sometimes authors are good in print, but not in public, So how do I do that? By the questions that I ask, by directing that, by being the listener, being in the driver's seat, using the tactical approach. They're doing most of the talking, but I'm guiding the thing. So the goal of the conversation the goal of the tactics, I should say, is to stay in the driver's seat. Okay. All of those tactics I mentioned are good ones, and we may be able to touch on one or two of them today, but I want to spend most of the time talking about one tactic, because this one tactic is the game plan that I promised that I would give you. The others abet the game plan, they help out, but this is the actual game plan. This is the instructions of how you know what to say next. How do you know how to navigate in the conversation? How do you know how to stay in the driver's seat of the conversation? And I'll tell you, this particular tactic is the simplest tactic imaginable to stop a challenger in their tracks, to turn their tables, and to get them thinking. It's the easiest way to put you in the driver's seat of the conversation. And this tactic has a name, and the name of the tactic is Columbo. Now, I see some gray heads here, so I know I'm talking to folk who know who Colombo was. And last week I was in Houston, and there was a gal who was from Azerbaijan. And I asked her, do they know about Colombo in Azerbaijan? And she said yes. When I taught in Cairo, they knew about Colombo. When I talk in Italy, they knew about Colombo. When I talk in France, they knew about Colombo. Everybody knows about Colombo, pretty much. Even now, young people can see him on TV, you know, on Nick at Night or whatever. So Colombo's a detective. He shows up at the crime scene wearing a trench coat like this. Looks like he slipped in it. Maybe he did. I got mine at Salvation Army. My wife, yeah, she likes to go to Salvation Army, but she tells me, so whenever you go to a place like that, you buy some clothes, you always got to check the pockets because you never know what you're going to find. Wait a minute, what's this? Oh my goodness, look at that. It's a cigar. Okay, it's just a plastic one, no worries. I actually hate cigars, really. Yeah, they're awful, aren't they? Whenever I get a real cigar, I always destroy it by fire. All the way down because I don't want anybody to stumble. You know, I'm just playing it safe. No worries at all. So Columbo's got a cigar. He's also got a pad of paper, but he can't use his pad of paper. Why not? He didn't have a pen or pencil. You know, he's not prepared. He's got to bum a pencil off of somebody. And he's walking around scratching his head, looking at the crime scene, muttering to himself. And this guy doesn't look like he can think his way out of a wet paper bag. I mean, this guy is stupid. But he's stupid like a fox because he's got a plan, right? And at some point, he'll put his fingers to furrowed brow like he's deep in troubled thought. And then he'll say something like this. I don't know. There's something about this thing that bothers me. Do you mind if I ask you a question? Right? And he asks that question, right? She gives the answer. Thank you. You're very intelligent. One more thing. And then he one more things them to death, right? Question after question after question. They start getting frustrated. He said, I'm sorry. It's because I'm asking all these questions, but I can't help it. It's a habit. And this is a habit that you ought to get into. The key to the Colombo tactic is the Christian goes on the offensive in an inoffensive way with carefully selected questions that advance the conversation. Let me say that again. The key to the Colombo tactic is the Christian goes on the offensive in an inoffensive way with carefully selected questions that advance the conversation. When in doubt, ask a question. When you're in a tough spot, ask a question. When you don't know how to respond, ask a question. Every single time you ask a question, you take the pressure off yourself and you put the ball in someone else's court. And sometimes that's what you need. I mean, just think in a tactical sense, if the pressure's on you, look at when, I like reading combat memoirs, all right? We had some conversation about this last night at dinner and trading titles of fabulous memoirs from men that paid the price in the heat of battle, okay? And we came up with a movie that came out a couple years ago called, it's about Benghazi, what, 13 hours? Yeah, 13 hours. This is really incredible, true to life circumstance. We know this is true because we got the recordings of all the communications. This just happened 6 or 7 years ago. You know, these guys got trapped in Benghazi, and anyway, I won't tell the story, but you know, these are guys. We had 4 guys that were moving through the city. There were bullets flying everywhere. Okay, but one of the things they do, they have a certain way of tactically moving forward, and they use what's called covering fire. So when one person is moving forward, the other guys are laying down a covering fire that frees up, say 2 to move forward, they take a position, they lay down covering fire for the other 2 to move in behind them. Why? Because what ends up happening with the covering fire is that distracts the opposition and it gives freedom for movement of the soldiers to better position in the field of fire. Okay, so I mean, there's always a liability of going back to these military metaphors because I don't want you to think about shooting people and killing people and all of that kind of stuff. But I think it just came to mind, and this is the first time I ever used this illustration, but it came to mind that when you are throwing a question out, that it functions like covering fire. And it's not illicit, it's not like a trick. It's an important part of the conversation, but it does function to give you cover. I understand that when you get in conversations with people, especially when you feel, here it is again, outgunned, that you are nervous and you feel very vulnerable and you don't want to go forward, you want to go backwards. I'm just going to hide. Okay, if we hide, we're not going to make any progress. Okay, we're to stand firm. We're to stand in the line of fire. This is what we're called to do. And that can be discomforting, obviously. And so if we can find a way of providing covering fire that gives us some safety to move, well, then we're more likely to do what we need to do, right, in the engagement. And in fact, that's what a question does. When we are tossing the questions out, the pressure is off us. Now the person is focusing in on answering the question if they're able to do it, and the focus isn't on you. Do you see the point there? So this gives you cover. And the more that you ask questions, the less there is pressure on you. In fact, you are not, in my view, at this point, now, we're talking conceptually, how we're maneuvering tactically. You don't have to offer anything from your side at this point. Now, there's a reason why you start out that way, and I'll get to the reason after lunch. But what I want you to feel is a real sense of, wow, there's a lot of safety here. I can be relaxed. I can be paying attention. I don't have to do anything, really, but toss the ball in the other court. And at this point, that's exactly what I'm saying. And it may turn out that in a lot of conversations, that's all you ever do, based on the circumstances, so you know how to respond to each person. Colossians chapter 4, verse 6. It's the same thing. Sometimes the circumstances are such that you have very little input into them. That's the way it works in some circumstances. Sometimes you have more. But I'm just giving you a concept that now here, with using this Columbo tactic, employing questions as a core part of your game plan, it provides you with covering fire, so to speak, in what would be, for many of you, it feels like a very vulnerable, dangerous kind of situation. So maybe the battlefield metaphor is apt at that point. Okay, so why questions, though? I've actually just pointed out one big advantage is that it takes the pressure off of you and it puts the ball in the other person's court. Now, by the way, it doesn't necessarily put the pressure on the other person. It just puts the ball in the other person's court. You're already feeling pressured because you know you're in kind of a hostile environment. Okay, and you're entering in because you know there's a different point of view. But they got people on the other side, they don't always feel that with the Christians. Most of the time, people who are verbal against Christianity think they've got it all over the Christian. They're not afraid of you. They're not all stressed out. They're not thinking, oh man, here comes that really smart Christian. He's going to have all kinds of things I don't know how to deal with. Man, where can I hide? That's not how they think about you. They think you're stupid. They think the things you believe are stupid. So throwing the ball into their court is not going to bother them. It's not going to be discomforting for them like having the ball in your court is discomforting for you at this particular point. So that's a huge advantage. That's one advantage. Another advantage is when you draw people out with questions, especially when you're initially employing the game plan here, and maybe no spiritual topics on the table. You're just drawing people out. You're getting to know something about them and their circumstances, their beliefs, or whatever. You're showing an interest in them. You know what that's called? That's called good manners. We ought to be teaching our kids that, and we try that. Kids don't always listen, but you'd be surprised at how much actually does stick if you say it enough. So when you're a group of friends, be sure to ask your friends some things about them. Ask them how their day went. Ask them about school. Ask them about their soccer game or their volleyball game or whatever it is. And you ask them. Okay? So what is that? That's good manners. That's drawing people out. You're showing a legitimate interest in other people, especially if you're listening when they're given an answer. So it's good manners. Hugh Hewitt, some of you might know his name. He's a national radio broadcaster. I've known Hugh for a long time. He's in Southern California. Been on a show a couple times, as a matter of fact. I did a 3-hour debate. 3 hours. That was his whole show. National debate with Michael Shermer, the atheist, on Hugh Hewitt's show. But Hugh has written a book called, a small little book. I think it's still in print. It's called In But Not Of. He was a great Christian ambassador and in very significant positions of national influence. Okay, and so what he's done is he's written a little book to help other Christians as they're young adults trying to plan their lives, how they can plan their lives wisely to have the greatest impact for the kingdom. In but not of. They're short vignettes. The chapters are all little short chapters. Well, he's got one chapter that is titled, Ask at least half a dozen questions in every conversation. Ask at least half a dozen questions in every conversation. Why? Because it's good manners. Partly. You're also going to learn a few things. Okay? But also, because he's a talk show host too, so am I. I'm a talk show host. That's why I can talk so clearly here. He says when you're asking questions, it puts you in the driver's seat of the conversation. When you're asking questions, it puts you in the driver's seat of the conversation. And that's where you want to be. So these are all virtues of asking questions, of having that be your game plan. So in a few minutes, we're going to break for lunch. But what we've done so far is we've laid a foundation of a mindset, of an approach to this whole project that I think is probably different than the way you've thought of it before. And now thinking of it in a different way, you are more relaxed about the prospect of making a difference and therefore much more willing to get into play in what previously you might have considered too challenging to engage. 2, that's too hot for me, too hot to handle. 3, LDS missionaries. Really? Moi? I'm going to talk to those guys and make a difference? I don't even know what LDS stands for. But no, with the tactical tools. Alex or Max? Max. Max maximally made use of the opportunity. It's the X's in there, see? That's what got me. Why? Because he had a tool. He was willing to get engaged. Did you feel real scared when you approached them at first? Psychologically, what were your feeling about that?
Well, I knew what LDS stood for because they had the name.
Okay, all right.
So far, so good. I was pretty relaxed because I knew that I didn't have to defend every aspect of the faith, but I could just have a conversation and not feel, so I didn't feel any pressure.
There you go. I'll pay you $10 when we're done. I hear this all the time. All the time. I didn't feel any pressure. Going into 3-1. Or did you have somebody else with you?
I had a friend with me.
A friend, but okay, 3-2? Okay, so he's still outnumbered. But it didn't matter. Could have been all by himself because he had a method that he knew he could put into place that would be productive even though he didn't know what would come of the conversation ultimately. And see, this has a tendency, you see what happens. Now, it makes us more relaxed and willing to step into a circumstance that we might not have been willing to step into before. And this is why my approach, I think, is having more of a force for the gospel, even though the harvesters are saying, oh, you're telling people not to get in and tell people about Jesus and people aren't going to get saved. Well, wait a minute. I'm getting a whole lot more people, I think, into play, giving the Holy Spirit a whole lot more opportunity to use the circumstances that follow from that willingness to step forward. All right? So that's the picture here. Now, we know we got a tactical game plan. We call it the Columbo tactic. It's using questions to move forward. Questions are good because they're polite. Questions are good because it puts the ball in the other court. There's no pressure on you. You gain information from the things that you ask questions about, and it also puts you in the driver's seat of the conversation, okay? So this is where we're going to leave it right now at lunchtime. And we're going to go and have about an hour and 15 minutes of 12:30, 1:30. At 1:30, you need to be back here, okay? So I guess you guys know the neighborhood. I think there's places that aren't too far where you can get a quick bite. Come back, be in your seats here by 1:30, and then we'll get into the game plan proper. It has 3 steps to it, and I'll explain to you what those steps are.